What's up, YouTube world? I just wanted to check in real quick. I know it's obviously late in the day, but I am leaving my sister's home, and just wanted to talk about the conversation we had. I don't want to get too deep into the specifics, but I have been trying to keep to a commitment to express myself authentically, to not feel the need to filter myself or hide my beliefs for the sake of avoiding uncomfortable conversations, because I think it's something that I know I've done a lot in my life is I just didn't feel comfortable saying certain things. Maybe I disagreed about something, and just for the sake of not wanting to explain myself and really get into that argument, I would just stay silent. And I'm trying more and more to, again, really just speak my mind and do it in a way that is not hostile or combative. And that's the other part that I really, I guess maybe I've struggled with in the past, is anytime I did get into that type of a disagreement, I would get very, very angry and, start yelling at the other person, and it would become very emotionally heated and very emotionally charged, obviously. And there were quite a few situations where I'd get into those types of arguments, and me and that other person just kind of set each other off, and it just escalated. And it's a lot of times that happens, you start getting into insults and things like that. So, and this conversation just now with my family, I revealed, not exactly for the first time, but I've started to open up that my, let's say, political views are very, very different from theirs and from what I used to believe. And I think my family is maybe having a little bit of a tough time with that. And so, this was just one of those times where I'm very proud of the fact that I stood my ground and I expressed myself, and I felt a lot of internal, turmoil, and, I definitely felt the instinct to lash out, but it's also an exercise in being in control of your own emotions, not letting the conversation dictate my emotions. I started sort of feeling that trigger, but I was able to disconnect from that and just staying grounded in my body and my truth. And of course, they were saying some things that was, quite frankly, a little bit insulting, but I didn't let it trigger me. And I think the more I think about it, I was actually, kind of thinking about it earlier on this drive. If you can get to a point where your family can't trigger you emotionally, bro, that seems like kind of a superpower. Because if there's anybody who can get under your skin, it's your frickin' family. They say nobody can push your buttons like your family because they installed them, right? So we all, obviously you grew up in the same house together, and we all have these emotional triggers. And, I could feel all my buttons being pressed, but it didn't affect me. I could feel like a little bit of tension, a little bit of heat, and I was was able to breathe through it and just very calmly and rationally express my beliefs. And I feel really good right now in a weird way. I felt like I took a giant shit. Just a giant emotional and intellectual shit. Being able to just speak my truth, even though I knew that it would be very, very difficult for my family to hear that. But, you know, I'm living my own experience, and my understanding of the world has changed drastically, and, you know, obviously my family they've also changed as well, but in certain ways they have not. And that's fine. I'm not here to change them. That's the other part of those conversations. I had no intention of changing their beliefs or convincing them. My only intention when I talk about expressing myself authentically, like, that's the only part of it. That's all that matters, is being able to just say what I believe, and it doesn't matter what other people think. You know, I'm not having the conversation to convince them or to get them to change anything. I'm like, this is just me. I don't believe that the government is here for our benefit. I don't believe that any government is here for our benefit. If I'm going to be a little more specific, we were talking about the Israeli-Palestine conflict. And, yeah, I won't tell you exactly what I think, but, yeah, whatever. I don't know. It's mostly, this video is about authentic expression and being the seat of your own emotional experience, not letting the outside world dictate how you feel, but you being the source of your emotional experience. And I'm looking at this camera. I see I got half a face is all black. Is that cool, or is that distracting? I think it looks kind of cool, to be honest. I got half a face. Yeah, those are my thoughts on that. I feel really good in a weird way. Like I said, it's a type of relief, like an emotional shit. It's a thing I've been holding on to, and I've been afraid to express it. And, you know, in the past, I've been very emotionally triggered by these types of conversations, and to be able to stay calm and unaffected while standing my ground and speaking my truth was a very powerful experience, and I'm grateful for that. And I hope to continue looking for opportunities to do that. And the other thing that was a big part of this conversation that I really, again, it's not about me preaching or judging other people, but it's about separating your beliefs from your identity. We identify with our beliefs, and that's part of what made the conversation so difficult for my family, is because, I mean, they got very emotionally. I mean, they didn't really yell. Nobody really raised their voice. I definitely stayed calm. They said some things that were, again, would have been insulting. But I started to see those judgments as just reflections of their own beliefs. And it's got nothing to do with me. And they're coming from a place of, you know, these beliefs are just intrinsic to who they are. And, you know, again, they're having their own experience here in this world, and so am I. And one is not better than the other. But from my vantage point, it seems like I would prefer, at least in that specific regard, I'd prefer to be where I'm at, you know, where I'm able to separate who I am from my beliefs, and that way I can keep pulling up my beliefs and challenging them and picking them apart and realizing that they're not part of me. And it just doesn't seem like my family is doing that. And whatever, they don't have to. I just think that by going through that process, at least for me, I believe I'm finding more of my true self. So that's it. Thanks for listening, and have a good night.